welcome to this CSG webinar on America's Knowledge Economy. I'm John Mountjoy. I serve as the Director of Policy and Research in CSG's headquarters office. And on behalf of the leaders and members of CSG, I'd like to welcome you to this event. As the United States economy gains momentum again, everyone, from legislators and regional planners to corporations and everyday workers, is focused on answering a few key questions. How can the U.S. sustain that momentum? Where should states and institutions place their bets and invest their resources to create long-term pathways to prosperity? To help answer these questions, the Council of State Governments has partnered with Elsevier to offer a new report, America's Knowledge Economy, a state-by-state review. This report, which you'll hear more about today during this webinar, was designed to explore the comparative research strength of states, which we hope will spur and inform discussions about higher education, research funding, and prioritization, and how the policy goals of states align with the goals and expertise of these research institutions. Analysis throughout this report pulls from a variety of measures and data sources, but in particular it relies heavily on analysis of Elsevier's proprietary abstract and citation database of peer-reviewed research literature that includes 56 million documents published in over 22,000 journals, book series, and conference proceedings by some 5,000 publishers. Over the last few months, Elsevier's researchers have worked with CSG to slice and dice the data, looking for trends in an ocean of information. As the data were analyzed, some insights began to bubble to the surface that we hope you can take and use to make more informed policy decisions. To give us a little more background on the Elsevier-CSG collaboration and how this report can be used to help state policymakers support the knowledge-based economy, I'd like to introduce Dr. Brad Fenwick as our first speaker. Dr. Fenwick is currently the Executive Vice President for Global Strategic Alliances at Elsevier, but he's had a lifelong dedication to higher education. He formerly held research executive roles as Vice Chancellor for Research and Engagement for the University of Texas at Knoxville and Vice President for Research at Virginia Tech. Dr. Fenwick, could you go ahead and get us started?
Thank you very much. It's very much a pleasure to join you, and we're very excited to launch this report in collaboration with CSG. If you'll advance to the next slide, we'll get started in providing some of the background of our report. Elsevier, in partnership with the Council of State Governments, provides for the first time an overview of every state's comparative knowledge economy advantages. This is based on the research conducted and the new knowledge that is produced within that state. It's important that local universities, businesses, government agencies, not-for-profit, incubators, economic development organizations recognize what they're doing to collaborate and coordinate to maximize these advantages. But first, you need to know what those advantages are. It turns out that the data is very strong and that research plays a key role in defining a state's future economic prosperity. From Silicon Valley in California to what we call Silicon Alley in New York City, or in New York, the Research Triangle in North Carolina to Kendall Square in Boston and Cambridge, there really are countless examples over the past several decades about how new knowledge created through research drives innovation, attracts jobs, and fosters economic growth. States with strong research ecosystems are simply able to attract, grow, and retain large, innovative companies and high-wage jobs. Firms seek to co-locate next to universities and benefit from that location, and other high innovation firms, because of the same, when they're in the same or complementary industries, because they benefit from knowledge spillovers. In an environment where all stakeholders increasingly demand accountability for the risk they take, particularly those that we see coming from public dollars, the states and the universities do not want to just invest more money. They're adopting strategies to identify areas to most effectively invest their available resources. The data from this report and the associated analytics provides, for the first time, a means to chart a more reliable course towards a positive economic future by detailing the comparative knowledge advantages for every state. Before we get into the data, it's always important if you are being data-driven and informed by that to understand the basis where that information comes. And let me briefly describe what Elsevier provides to the collaboration with CSG. Next slide, please. So Elsevier is one of the world's largest publishers, if not the world's largest publisher in science and technology areas. But it also is an information company. In fact, we're the fourth largest information company in the world. And the data we provide, as earlier indicated, comes from millions of articles that are submitted to us every year and goes into a database that we call Scopus. It includes just a mountain of data. From that, we're able to interrogate that database and get new insights about all things related to generation of new knowledge and how it applies. That includes, just the publications themselves, but also increasingly patents. And we also have a number of databases that help support research. Next slide. So if you look at all the content in which the data from this report is driven, it is a substantial amount. We hold as Elsevier over 3 petabytes of unique high-quality content that comes from a number of sources. You may recognize our partner, our sister company, LexisNexis, who has been in this business for a long time. So from the academic or research standpoint, Elsevier stands proud in terms of all the content it has. And from the public point of view, LexisNexis provides lots of information that is in the public domain related to investment and government support. Next slide, please. Scopus is this remarkable database that we continue to rely on and continues to grow. If you're relying on that database, it's important to know how broadly it covers. And if you can see, it's just not Elsevier's publications, but it's publications from all publishers across multiple disciplines. So in addition to the health sciences, we have great depth in the physical sciences, the social sciences, and the life sciences, essentially covering all aspects of knowledge development that's coming out of the research community, whether that is in universities or from the private sector when they publish their work or patent that work. Next slide. Based on that, we're able to use those data sources to interrogate that data and come up with new insights and data that can help inform public policy decisions, whether they are the research output that's occurring or the relative article share within the discipline that's been coming from an individual state. Importantly, the impact of that research, how important it is and how well it's recognized. We're moving very aggressively from just the amount of research to the quality of that research. Increasingly, it's important to foster and recognize research collaborations, and how we access that is just not through the citations alone where other scientists recognize the work. Increasingly, we're able to recognize the public consumption of that research as it becomes available through open access channels in terms of downloading that research and putting it to work to motivate the economy. Next slide. And we recognize that basic research that creates new knowledge is a long process. We often don't fully appreciate what it has done for us and what it can do for us in the future. A good example are smartphones. If it wasn't for basic research in such things as storage of data or new batteries or touchscreen displays or signal compression, we wouldn't have all the conveniences we have now. It's important we don't take that for granted, or assume that everything that is known is worth knowing is already known. There's a great deal of basic research still to be done, and the future is just as bright as it was a few years ago in terms of advancing the economy through the discovery of new knowledge. Next slide. But how research is funded is an increasingly important question. given the financial circumstances we are in and the competition that we face as a nation from other countries around the world, particularly China, Korea, Singapore, and other nations, how we foster and grow basic research and that knowledge that underpins our economy is important. Clearly, the federal government's support for this has been gradually declining over time. And what's interesting is, countercyclical to that, the private sector often steps in to fill that void. Also important on this slide are the two lines, the red one and the orange one, where non-federal government support, particularly at the state level, and universities' investment themselves, often through their endowments and foundations, are increasingly investing in these enterprises of research because they know full well that the benefits that they produce. Next slide. Ultimately, what new knowledge does is it requires the discovery and then the dissemination and the use of those type things. We often hear about innovation, but really innovation is layered on top of new knowledge discovery. You can't innovate unless you know something new. And we're very much supportive of what we call the triple helix model, where it's this collaboration between government and industry and academia that allow things to happen that any one or even two of those units would have a difficult time doing on their own. Our report tries to foster these relationships by recognizing that new knowledge that is supported by governments, created by academia, and then used by industry really drives the economy. And that each state has a certain core competency in terms of the knowledge that it creates, that it helps underpin its economy. Next slide. And we do this with Elsevier at multiple levels. So that, you know, as indicated before, we can slice and dice the data various ways. We can do it at the national level. For example, this is a report we do relatively frequently for the UK's Department of Business Innovation and Skills. It's essentially their commerce department, and we look at the international comparative performance of the United Kingdom in terms of its research base, as we can do for other nations around the world. Next slide. We can also do it at the state level, and this is a collaborative report we did in creating a technology roadmap for Illinois. This is a deep dive with very granular data, too much data to go into a national report that we're presenting today. But it gives you an indication that there's a great deal of additional data that's available, and that we're encouraging states and other people interested to contact us so we can do similar type of work for the individual state. Next slide. We can also do it increasingly as we slice the data a different way at the city level. And increasingly, cities are making these kind of investments. We've seen that at several examples. Roosevelt Island, where Cornell is now building a research campus in New York City, is a good example of that. Philadelphia is taking their waterfront and making that available to their universities to build innovation campuses. Nebraska has done that with their innovation campus at the University of Nebraska. But we also did see places where you might not expect, where Amsterdam invested in universities to come to Amsterdam to do work there, and MIT was fortunate enough to get the resources to help Amsterdam with their growing their economy. And the final slide here. And finally, this report we're launching today is both a national survey in terms of cutting across all the states, but it also provides granular data for each individual state. So you can look at a state's comparative advantage against its neighbors, and the comparative advantage it may have against other states, as well as globally. Next slide. So if you look at the key motivating ideas behind the report, it's clear that states with strong ecosystems are able to attract the companies and retain those and produce high-wage jobs that help underpin the economy of the state. This report and the process that we've taken here helps identify and showcase those research strengths. in areas like research output and impact, areas where an individual state has a particular strength and focuses on that and uses that to advance its economy. We are also very interested in inputs and research efficiencies, and then how you transfer that knowledge into the private sector so it can grow the economy. And fundamentally, how we can collaborate better to make everybody's success more reliable. Next slide. So
very good. Well, thanks, Dr.
We'd like to now move on and actually provide some granular aspects of the data. And I'll step back and let my colleague George take from there.
Well, very good, Dr. Fenwick. Let me just take a moment to introduce George. Next, we have one of the report's principal authors, Mr. George Land with Elsevier, who's going to offer some more details about what the report contains and how it can be used. I can tell you on a personal level that George was one of the chief slicers and dicers of this particular data, and really just a wonderful partner to work with on a daily basis. George?
Thanks so much. You can advance the next slide, please. So one of the major findings from the report, and this probably comes as no surprise to many of you, is that the production of research is not necessarily balanced in the U.S. As with all things, the 80-20 rule applies, and the combined absolute number of research publications of the top 5 states comprised more than 50% of the total U.S. output. And the colored map you see on the bottom of the screen there shows which states have produced the highest proportion of the U.S.'s total output. This closely follows what we see in terms of the distribution of total R&D funding across states as well. Can you advance to the next slide, please? That said, just because the production and funding of research in the U.S. is concentrated in a few states, that doesn't necessarily mean that those other states aren't producing impactful research. And in fact, when we analyzed the data, we found that across the U.S. as a whole, U.S. research is cited more than 49% higher than the world average. And here what we're doing is we're looking at how much U.S. research publications have been cited by other publications, both U.S. and around the world. And the map on the bottom actually may actually underestimate the full impact of U.S. research, because if you'll notice, even the state with the lowest output, North Dakota at 1.14, its research is still cited more than 14% higher than the world. And states at the top end of the spectrum, such as Massachusetts and Washington, are cited more than twice as much as the world average. We'll move on to the next slide, please. What this report does is provide, on a whole host of different indicators, as Brad mentioned, how the U.S. research base performs. The key findings that you'll find at the beginning of the report provide some general national numbers, such as how many publications are produced per $1 million of U.S. R&D expenditures, as well as what are the top research areas that the U.S. publishes in, such as medicine and engineering. It also dives a little bit deeper into what are the specific states and their research competencies. So, for example, Minnesota produced a very high level of publications per $1 million of R&D expenditures, 10.5. And as we'll get to later on in this presentation, states like North Carolina have produced a particularly high relative amount of research in areas like medicine. You go on to the next slide, please. In addition to providing very high-level research findings at the report itself, we've also produced individual state profiles that may be of interest to many of you for each of the 50 states. These two-page state profiles provide, on the same level, major highlights about each individual state's research performance. And here what we see for the example states of Texas and Virginia are, again, how the state performs on different measures, such as the impact of their research, what are the major areas in which they have a comparative advantage, what are the main states with whom their state's researchers collaborate the most. In the case of Texas, it's California. In the case of Virginia, it's Maryland. Definitely see a close geographic correlation there, and several other indicators. You can advance to the next slide, please. So for a few examples of the findings throughout the report, these are just some quick bullet points. States such as Minnesota and Rhode Island and North Carolina, they actually produced the greatest amount of relative volume in medical research, whereas other states such as Maryland and North Carolina and Nebraska also produced a high relative volume in research areas such as biochemistry, genetics, and molecular biology. The report is peppered with these kinds of highlights, and then the state profiles themselves provide a more intuitive way of diving deeper for each individual state on what are the areas of its superlative performance. You can advance to the next slide, please. One of the ways that you might ask how we actually get at this data for questions about determining what is a state's specialty in a research area can be answered by analyzing how a state's research output is distributed across all of the research areas. What you'll notice here in this graph is that we've actually mapped out across the 27 major research areas as classified in our database how a state performs. The dotted green line that you see around the center in the circle represents the U.S. average, how much on average a U.S. state or the U.S. as a whole produces in each of these subject areas. And the olive green line that you see represents, in this case, North Carolina's specific output or relative output across those areas. Now, as a whole, we know that U.S. output is quite focused on medicine. In fact, more than a quarter of all U.S. output was in that field. But if you look at North Carolina's research, medicine research actually occupies a higher percentage. And in general, North Carolina's relative output in the health sciences is much higher than that of the U.S. average, as indicated by the fact that the olive green line is much farther away from the center than the dotted green line. We can advance to the next slide, please. Now, we then take that same data about the relative volume of a state's research output across research areas, and we then plot that against the state's relative impact of its research. So again, the x-axis or the horizontal axis represents how much a state produces in a particular area, where 1 is the U.S. average. And the y-axis represents the relative impact of the state's research in those subject areas. And here the U.S. average is 1.49. What you'll probably notice then is a classic kind of Boston matrix, a 2x2, where subject areas in the top right quadrant are areas where states have a comparative advantage. You know, they both produce a high relative amount of research in these areas, and they also produce highly impactful research in those areas. And you'll notice for North Carolina's quadrants, medicine is really high, not only in the top right quadrant, but rather high in the top right, part of that top right quadrant. And in fact, you compare this graph for North Carolina with graphs across all the other states, you'll notice that North Carolina's relative performance in this is 3rd in relative volume and 4th in relative impact. And so here is how we're able to make some inferences about the state's comparative advantage in a particular research area. If you could advance to the next slide, please. We do the same thing for New York in this case. And again, if we analyze New York's research output, both in terms of relative volume and in terms of research impact, we notice that computer science actually stands out as a subject that pops up in that top right quadrant. And in fact, if we analyze how New York performs relative to all other states, it actually is 4th amongst all states in relative volume in computer science, and 10th amongst all states in the relative impact of its research in computer science. We can move on to the next slide, please. Now, in addition to analyzing where states have their relative research foci, we also wanted to look at research inputs and efficiencies. What we did here was we analyzed the National Science Foundation's data about how much universities state universities or universities across all states received in terms of R&D expenditures, and then we counted the number of publications produced by those universities. As a whole, U.S. universities produced about 12.7 publications per $1 million of research and development expenditures. And as you'll notice, the map below shows the range of how the state's academic research outputs were per $1 million of expenditure spent. The main takeaway from this is research does require a substantial investment. That said, if you'd advance to the next slide, the payoffs are definitely worth it in terms of driving innovation. And one of the ways that our report tries to proxy for innovation is by analyzing research that is cited in patents. So, for example, we actually looked at all the patents granted by the U.S. Patents and Trademarks Office over the past 10 years, past 8 years, and we looked at how many of those patents cited research specifically by New York universities. And here what we found was that New York's research in computer science had been cited in over 1,000 patents. We then created several normalized indicators to account for how much basically a state's patent citation share comprised its total research performance. And what we found was certain states, perhaps not surprising, such as Massachusetts and Maryland, their research actually contributed disproportionately to the research that was then cited in all U.S. patents. And this provides a good proxy, again, of how much U.S. research is contributing and driving innovation. Now, if you advance to the next slide, please. The main takeaways, in summary, for the report are that the U.S. does produce a very large amount of highly impactful research, and this is distributed across all the states. Through using a variety of metrics, each of those states can identify its relative comparative research strengths, kind of by triangulating its performance. And research does require substantial focused investments, but the payoffs are definitely worth it. I'd now like to turn it back over to Dr. Brad Fenwick to conclude with some additional thoughts.
So next slide. So there's lots of information here and lots more that is available. So how do you take what's been provided and actually put it to work is the question we're wanting to have all of you think about. So we've thought about some of those ourselves, and we're going to provide some examples to get you started. First of all, the data helps identify research areas your state is good in, and that you can leverage that and that experience in terms of attracting business and workers and students. And there's good examples of that. If you are in a state where it has a major aerospace company that is looking to relocate, they'll be interested in what R&D is occurring locally and what new potential employees are being produced by their universities. If you're one of those states that have that comparative advantage, then you can market your state to those companies in a way that will hopefully attract and hopefully hold them in your state to help with your economy. Now, there'll be other states that have other comparative advantages, and they can attract and grow on those. The real message here is to recognize what your strengths are, support and defend those, and then grow those in terms of a comparative advantage that will attract a nucleus of talent and companies to take advantage of that talent. The data can actually help also inform strategy and decision making about investments in higher education and research. Example might be if your state or university are applying for multi-million-dollar federal grants to help with economic development. How do you help make the case that your state is a particularly strong place to invest those? You can think about the patent data, you can think about the efficiency and effectiveness, and you can also think about the examples of where your state has a comparative advantage. You already have a track record of success in creating new knowledge and transferring that knowledge, and have a wealth of graduates coming out of those highly ranked programs that will be available to take advantage and actually advance that new knowledge. Ultimately, of course, we also know that small businesses and small innovation companies and startups are key to growing our state's economies. And a state may be able to use this data to help their small businesses connect with academic researchers. So if a company is looking to relocate or is having a challenge, they may look to your state if they're aware of it, and what the data provides is an avenue for you to market what the state's core competencies are related to research. So you can be found, and so those connections and collaborations can be made. Next slide, please. So ultimately, if you sum up everything we've done here, the data we're providing is really the tip of the iceberg. A fully comprehensive report similar to the one we did with Illinois would just be a voluminous amount of information. So we're providing a start here with all of the data that gives you an indication of what's available, but also it's an indication about what your state's strength in through those 2 pages that are available that details information about each state. The report's freely available on the website as demonstrated here, and also we're more than happy to provide individual states data on request. What we're hoping to do is to use all the information we have in our collaboration CSG to dig deeper and help you identify the areas of particular strengths so you can make wise decisions in terms of public policy and investment. We have tools available to assist with that help mine this data, and we also have the availability of doing more custom type data analytics for individual disciplines, individual states. You know, it's very difficult to allocate resources. Ultimately, you have to be able to winnow down those areas that have high potential for return. And the data helps focus that where we have now, but there's additional data available. If you want more information, there's websites here that you can contact, as well as Daniel Calto, and George is available to answer any of your questions. Next slide.
Very good. Well, Dr. Finn, oh, go ahead.
No, we'll end here and pass it off to our colleague for more discussion and questions.
Very good. Well, Dr. Fenwick, thank you. George, thank you very much. Finally, I would like to introduce Mr. Charles Krasansky from Cornell University, who for the last 24 years has been the liaison between Cornell and the New York State Legislature, and who can offer some insight on the importance of aligning the goals of the research community with the economic and workforce development goals of a state. Mr. Krasansky, I imagine this particular report is right up your alley, and we appreciate any comments or thoughts you may have.
Sure, thanks. You know, it is right up my alley, because what we do is, you know, I'm busy educating the legislature and the governor, and again, they need sort of constant education because, you know, they come and go. Like you said, I've been here 24 years. I think there have been 5 governors and change in leadership of the legislature several times, and many staff turnovers. And a report like this is excellent because it's not. First of all, it just came out. You guys are releasing it now. It's very current. We are unable to do this kind of work ourselves. We've tried in the past. That's why I know how good a report it is, because on 2 occasions in the last 10 years, we at Cornell have gotten together with other people in the state, and we've tried to do this for New York State. It was a lot of work. It was pretty good, but it only talked about New York. And what you've done here is you focused in on every state to a great degree, but also you've given a perspective so that state by state decisions can be made, as you said, as Brad said, you know, resources can be allocated efficiently, and it's not one school saying it or one interest group saying it, but it's you know, it's backed up by a lot of data, and again, you've demonstrated that, and so it gives decision makers a roadmap, basically, as has been said, how to make investments to accomplish some of their goals. Again, some of their goals these days are things like workforce, economic activity. There's a lot of goals about, you know, keeping smart people in states or moving them to states, starting companies, those kinds of goals. and the report allows decision makers at a state level to start making decisions based on real data rather than just anecdotes or hopes. So that report was right up my alley. Let me tell you, as has been said, Brad mentioned it was in the report. The Cornell, and it wasn't Cornell's idea. The city of New York decided, Mayor Bloomberg, a few years ago, that he wanted to take advantage of the expertise at some of the best universities in the country and the world, opened up a competition, awarded it finally to Cornell and Technion teaming up. But this report, if we had had it, we would have actually used it, I'm sure, because there were discussions, which schools around the nation and the world are strongest in certain disciplines. We did our own checking and cross-checking, but again, this report gives you that in multiple ways. Lets you decide on who to team up with. Sometimes we don't know who the best people and the best institutions are in certain fields, or we think we know, and maybe that's based on old data. So again, the report really very, very helpful to not only policymakers at state governments, but also university officials. So no, I think the report's great. The states have to decide now's the time to step in and try to take advantage of some of this expertise and the resulting economic benefits and workforce and societal benefits that they can do. Some states are taking big actions, and it's our hope, obviously, that other states do as well. New York State's done a considerable amount in boosting and steering their research institutions in the last about 30 years, and they're doing the state's doing a fair amount. We, of course, always are trying to get them to do more based on where we see opportunities that help not only the institutions but the state. And again, this report, I've already shown it to some people and talked about it. We're getting it out in New York State, trying to get people to focus on it. The budget cycle starts up at the end of this year again, and that's when some of the allocations and resources are made. So it's already coming in handy, and it's been very useful. So those are some of my high points of what I see the report being used as and for, and I'd love to again answer any questions anybody else has.
Well, very good. Well, thank you, Mr. Kazansky. We appreciate you joining us, and also thanks to our other panelists, Dr. Fenwick and Mr. George Land. We've got a question that has come from one of our listeners. And that question is, how did you assess the impact of environmental science? George, that may be a question for you.
Great. So just to give everyone a little bit more background on how we're assessing all of the impacts of any research, we're drawing on our Scopus Abstracts and Citations database, which is a database, as Brad mentioned earlier in the webinar, that comprises over 57 million documents, records from over 5,000 publishers. Each of those publishers then have journals in particular subject areas, and we've actually divided it into those 27 major ones that you've seen. Environmental science is one of them. And we then look at all the publications from those environmental science journals. Now, amongst those publications, each of those publications can receive citations from other publications. This is when one article references a previous article, trying to either build on its work or contest it or whatnot. We, at a first cut, count up all of the citations that each article accrues, and then we aggregate that. But in between that, we also normalize for the number of citations that an average article in, say, the field of environmental science in a particular year receives. So it is a little bit more complex, but we want to make sure that we most accurately capture the impact of research. And in order to do that, we want to make sure that we are comparing apples and apples. In this case, comparing only research in, say, environmental science from a particular state like New York, for example, with all other research from environmental science. I hope that answers the question.
Very good. Another question, and I would direct this towards the entire panel, do any of you have any cautions about using this particular information that's contained within the report?
This is Brad. I'm happy to answer that question as somebody that had to make these kind of decisions on a regular basis. I believe that this kind of data helps inform decisions but should not necessarily make the decision. There are lots of other factors that go into decision making. But it's clear if you make decisions with no data at all, your odds of coming up with the correct decision or being able to defend that decision are quite limited. So I guess my caution is that while this data is unique and first of its kind and very informative, it should serve to go into the mix of other factors that help inform decision making in terms of what you want to emphasize, what you want to recognize, what you want to promote, what do you want to fund.
Mr. Krasansky, would you have anything to add to that as somebody who sort of uses this information on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, no, I think it's just as Brad said. I think it supports a lot of what we thought we already knew. Where it may contradict or not be helpful, it just requires further digging. The politics, let's say, of resource allocation at the state level, hey, that's based on much less data than is here in this report. And if this can steer people into making better decisions and ultimately using money more wisely, so that the long-term impacts are better, that'll only be helpful to everybody involved, so that we don't have somebody making some poor decisions with a white elephant or a boondoggle. I think that again, nobody's going to, I think, just take a report like this and just say, okay, we'll just do exactly, we'll follow this point by point. It's really not designed for that, obviously. It's designed to support, first of all, a very general argument, and that is, hey, people, take a look at first, what do we have? It really speaks to, within these states, within this nation, what are we really good at? What are some of our strengths? Well, this is one area of real strength that we have that we can build on, rather than, ooh, let's dream up something new that we can rely on and hope someday will be the economy of the future. No, this is actually going back to the basics and saying, okay, let's see, what are we really good at now? Okay, obviously we've got competition. There's more and more. The report speaks to this. We have to do work to maintain our position, but it's much easier to do that than it is to pick out a new area that we're not strong in, manufacturing area that we're not good in, or some kind of a some field that we're not good in that we think is going to be real hot. This actually says, it reminds people, hopefully, hey, look, this research intensive area, just like Brad said, it really gives a lot of support that what we've been investing in results in these innovations, these activities, these devices, and and jobs down the line. So I think that's how it's used. It's mostly to get this argument going in the right direction, and then helping people make specific choices.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you. Question from a listener regarding some specific data that was shared. The scatter plot shown for North Carolina and New York, how might a listener go about getting that information for their state and the figures on which it's based for every state?
Great question. So in addition to obviously consulting the report itself for those specific two states, the next best step is actually checking out the individual two-page state profiles that we've compiled for every state. On the second page of those profiles, we actually do have not the scatter plot, but the radar chart, the circular plot that shows the relative impact of the state's research across all subject areas. You can then feel free to obviously contact both Elsevier in general and myself and Daniel to get at some of the more specific figures. But a lot of the charts that are available, and I believe the charts that are available on the CSG website, we've made them interactive, so you can actually click through and kind of find the exact stats for your particular state on a variety of measures. So feel free to see what available resources we already have made publicly, and then contact us more if you have more detailed questions, because we'd love to dive deeper into the data and share that with you.
Very good. So if folks have some additional information that's not contained within the report, then they can either contact CSG, they can contact Elsevier. We'll make sure that we work with you to identify the information that you're looking for. A general question for the panel, or actually this may be more towards Brad and George. Can this data be used really for predictive analysis, or is it more of a snapshot of sort of where we are today?
Yeah, very good question, and I'll take a first shot at it, and George can answer some additional. It does both. It is indeed a snapshot for today, but as new research is going, this data gets updated essentially daily and is a very active enterprise. So it does change. But we can also look historically in terms of when decisions were made. For example, the Roosevelt Island or the Research Triangle and other investments that paid off. So it gives us some historical data that these investments are appropriate. In terms of more predictive analysis, we are now, and I'll have George speak more to this, we are now using this data to try to look at trend analysis, which is a factor related to predictive analysis. It gives us an indication of where science is headed. We're all trying to get ahead of the curve. It's important to make accurate predictions and make those investments because the resources are limited. And the data then provides a trend. What areas of science is getting hot, where new inventions have occurred that enables additional research. That is the next sort of frontier for all of us. And I'll have George say a few words about our new project related to trend analysis.
Thanks, Brad. So as Brad mentioned, we do, as the report does show, we do have quite a few snapshots of where the current state of research is. We also have trends analysis in terms of just how the state's research overall and in particular areas has grown or changed over time. One of the things that our new, more advanced trends analysis looks at is, in addition to traditional measures of research output and impact, such as citations, we actually look at usage, which is just how much research is being viewed online or downloaded by users. And here what we can find is both what areas in general seem to be getting the most attention in terms of just, again, pure downloads, page views, and whatnot, and also what research areas by your particular state's research institutions and publications are getting the most attention. That's a level of granularity that's very hard to kind of summarize or put together in this report, so we only have very, very aggregate statistics related to downloads and download shares. But it's something that from our internal analyses and some of the more specifics we love to go into.
I just add to that is that as we shifted from paper-based scientific communications to online, we've moved the scientific community, indeed the public now consumes research by downloading it, and we can track those downloads. And what's interesting, we can see certain areas of science going viral, so to speak, and that means there's lots of interest in this emerging area. And now we can make that available so the rest of the public and community can recognize that something hot is going on here, so they can then make their right moves so they can contribute and advance that area of emerging science.
We've got a research question from one of our listeners, and that is, after the count of the number of citations, how do we get to understanding the true outcomes that support health, safety, and general well-being? How do we know that these outcomes are being met by research?
Yeah, it's a very good question, is that you essentially have to look historically to look at innovations in research that produce new standards of living for us and the global the world. Next thing, I'll go all the way back to agriculture and the development of new varieties through research, to new materials that make our lives safer, whether it's through, safer cars or safer transportation, to communication type of stuff. So the history is robust that research actually then contributes to quality of life, well-being, health, and economic prosperity. There's no reason to believe that, new research and new knowledge being created now won't do even more of that going forward, because in fact, our knowledge base is actually quite thin in terms of many of areas of research. A good example of that is, with all the carbon fiber work that went on early on, is now finding its way into airplanes that reduces their environmental impact. They're lighter, safer, stronger, easier to build. Overall, research provides that new knowledge that creates a better future for all of us.
Hmm.
And so does that perhaps provide a little bit of a transition to the question of where this project might go in the future?
It does, and we're very interested in getting input from everybody about what would be next steps. This was our first attempt at doing this. As I think everybody recognized, it was a huge effort, and it's been very well received as a first attempt to do this kind of work. It's enabled because we have the databases and the technology advanced to do this, but we're not done by any means. So we're interested in asking what's the next, bit of information, the next type of analysis that would help, grow the economies, help the public be confident in research, and how to use that new knowledge to help our economies. Ways of doing that, of course, is trying to make this link stronger between public investment in research and innovation through new product development and new discoveries for healthcare and engineering and agriculture and on and on. Those linkages are often very delayed because the new knowledge that gets created sometimes doesn't go to work for 10 or 15 years. And in our sort of culture, 10 or 15 years seems like an eternity when we're looking for 1 or 2 year turnarounds. But as in the early slide, investments that were 20 or 30 years previously ended up in the basis for technologies we use every day, like our smartphones, in our computers. So we all believe that the future is bright by making these kind of investments, but doing them in focused strategic ways that leverages core competencies as well as competitive advantages in each state. We don't need every state to be strong in everything. What we do need is some states to be strong in things that we can rely on, and as a nation, then as in the aggregate, be competitive internationally.
Very good. Well, Dr. Fenwick, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Mr. Land, thank you, and Mr. Krasansky, appreciate your willingness to join us on this call. We've reached the end of our time. I know that we've had a very enriching conversation, and we've had a few questions answered. And so we look forward to continuing to roll out this important report to the states and answer questions for the states as we go. If you've enjoyed this webinar, you can learn more about the webinars that the Council of State Governments offers by visiting our website at www.csg.org. And with that, I would wish everyone a good afternoon and see you soon. Thanks.